Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new talk in the Paideia Institute online lecture series. My name is Marco Romani. I'm your host today, and I'm a senior executive at the Paideia Institute. It's an honor and a privilege for me to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Professor Kathleen Coleman. Kathy is the James Lowe Professor of the Classics at Harvard University. Her research focuses on Latin literature of the early Roman Empire and on Roman social history, where her specialties include institutional violence and public spectacle. Kathy is originally from Zimbabwe and holds degrees from the University of Cape Town, the University of Rhodesia, as her country was called at the time, and the University of Oxford. She taught at the University of Cape Town and held the chair of Latin at Trinity College Dublin before becoming part of the faculty at Harvard, which is where I first met her. She has published a commentary on Statius, book 4 of the Silvae, and one on Marshall's Liber Spectaculorum, both of which have been published by Oxford University Press. Kathy is also the current president of the Internationale Thesaurus Commission, the board responsible for publishing the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae, and the Thesaurus itself will in fact be our topic for today's talk. So it's with great pleasure that I give you Kathleen Coleman and her lecture, A Biography of Latin Word by Word, the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. Over to you, Kathy.
Unmuted. Marco, thank you so much for your introduction and for this invitation to talk to this large constituency about the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. And this is a tool of tremendous value to everybody interested in Latin, but it's hard to use. And so I've divided my lecture into 3 parts. The first part will be a very brief history of the project. And then the second part will track exactly the handout. So this is information you need to be able to use the thesaurus. And then in the third part, I'm going to give some examples. It won't be necessary for you to have the handout in front of you if you don't have it, because I've put everything on my PowerPoint. And I'm now going to attempt to share my screen and start with the PowerPoint. So bear with me for a second while I do that. Does it show?
Yes.
Can you can see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Okay, fine. Well, then let's get busy with this fascinating topic. So the history in brief. To me, this little cartoon made by Julius Friedlander in 1864 of Theodor Mommsen copying down an inscription for his huge project, the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum at Castel del Sangro in Italy, encapsulates the spirit of the age, I believe. It was this wonderful sort of surge of confidence in Europe, in particularly in the academies of Germany, that it was possible in that age of positivism to capture everything that was knowable about the ancient world. And Mommsen's tremendous project to copy down all the inscriptions surviving in Latin from the entire Roman Empire is exactly the spirit in which the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae also, which is a younger relative of the CIL, was born. So mid-19th century, this tremendous drive to capture the information about antiquity led to renewed attempts, and I stress renewed attempts, to try and capture all of the Latin vocabulary in one enormous dictionary. And I say a renewed attempt because this had been attempted many times before, and some of you will be aware of Gesner, the great humanist, who was one of the people who had tried to do this. But it was actually Edward Wölfflin in Munich at the end of the 19th century, who spearheaded ultimately the final effort to do this, which is the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. And in this, he was indeed supported by Theodore Mommsen, who you see here in this famous portrait with a bust of Julius Caesar on his desk, and the evidence of his industry scattered on the floor around him. So Mommsen is a shadow behind the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae, but it is Edward Wilflin, the Swiss scholar, whom you see here sitting reading, who was actually the prime mover and shaker. And Wilflin started a Vorarbeit, as the Germans would say, so a pre-effort, a sort of prolegomenon towards the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae by founding a journal in 1883 called the Archiv für lateinische Lexikographie und Grammatik, so an archive for Latin lexicography and grammar-related issues, of which 15 volumes were published, and many of these of the articles in here were sketches of what a thesaurus article on a Latin word might look like. And I, simply to illustrate this, have selected two articles with exactly the same title. Michel Breal in 1896 produced a one-page article in volume 9 of the Archive, Stantes Missi, in which he analyzed two inscriptions that have this phrase in them. And he concluded that the phrase represented the survival of gladiators who were not defeated in the arena. So the survival of gladiators, he thought that this phrase actually meant they survived as opposed to being killed. But then a reply came with another one-page article in 1906 by Einar Löfsted, who demonstrated that actually this phrase means fought to a draw. It is the phrase used when two gladiators are unable to reach a decisive conclusion in their combat. And so that is the kind of lexicographical inquiry that is spearheaded by the Archive. And here I've given you the one surviving piece of evidence for two gladiators in combat. They happen to be female gladiators. This is now in the British Museum, where Stantes Missi is translated into Greek, apelluthesan, they were reprieved. And we see here two gladiators, neither of whom has been able to defeat the other one. And I show this not just because it's fun, but also because I want to illustrate the point that the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae does not have any illustrations. It may refer occasionally to material evidence if that is necessary to explain something about a word, but it does not actually reproduce any material evidence from the ancient world. It is exclusively verbal. Now, how did they do it? Well, in 1894, the project got off the ground, and it was spearheaded under Wilflin's impetus by the 5 learned academies of the German-speaking lands. So that is the academies of Berlin, Göttingen, Leipzig, Munich, and Vienna. And they used a system to capture all of surviving Latin down to the Antonine age, a system developed by somebody called Meusel, whereby they used, as you can see in front of you here, double folio sheets onto which they copied out in the same number of lines per chunk the continuous text from an author or from a set of inscriptions. In this case, it's Livy, book 26. And you can see that from chapter 30, we have at the top left-hand corner of this sheet, the first 3 sections. And then if you go across to the top right-hand corner, we have the next 3 sections. Then you go back to the left-hand side and we've got the next 4 sections, etc. Okay, so all the same amount of material. And then they have copied all this in something called hectographic ink, which can be easily reproduced by lithography. So when these sheets had been copied out, they were sent off to a lithographer to reproduce them as many times as was deemed necessary, so that they could then be cut up into slips. The pre-stage, even before they did the copying, was of course to establish the text that they were going to use. And so sometimes, as you will see in a minute, there will be marginalia alerting people to some different readings in manuscripts, but we can get onto that in a minute. At all events, the making of the slips is very important. Just imagine there are 10 million of these slips in the archive in Munich, where the Thesaurus is being created at this, still being created at this very moment. There are 10 million of these slips. And the way they made them was, if we take here the first 3 lines, I don't know whether you can see that at the top, sorry. Anyway, it's Lucan, book 1, lines 217 to 219. And this little section here is reproduced here on several slips, each of which underlines a different word. So that you can see how economical this system was. Each of these slips will then ultimately be filed chronologically under that word, so that the first slip, the slip for Tunk, will go in chronologically in the order in which Lucan is established in the Thesaurus's repertoire of authors. So I hope that that's clear how they've made the slips. And indeed, you can see that we have all the words of the first line represented on the slips that are visible on the screen. And this is what a slip by itself will look like. This is the slip for Virgil Aeneid 3, lines 669 to 681. And this particular slip is illustrating the word centio. Virgil is the 19th author in the chronological series in the Thesaurus library, hence the 19 in a square box in the top left-hand corner. And there are 79 slips for this particular extract. So 79 is written in the bottom in a circle. And down the right-hand side, you can see some of the marginalia that I mentioned a minute ago, alerting people to some variants in manuscripts and occasionally spelling and things like that. So these slips are very precious. They represent the material from which the Thesaurus has been made, and everything is included down to the Antonine age, whether it was written originally on a manuscript or a piece of papyrus or on a sherd or a coin or an inscription. Wherever it was written, it was captured and is in the archive now. And then, of course, these slips have to be stored. And here there's an extremely cunning invention of the 19th century, the so-called sand box. And this is a box, a cardboard box, where the front has a hinge and can be brought forwards so that you can easily rifle through everything that is in the box. You can see that if you've got more than 1,000 slips in one of these boxes, it's very, very nice to be able to separate them with your thumb while you are looking through them. So the sand box was a tremendously valuable invention. And the Thesaurus archive is full of sand boxes containing these slips. Now, after the Antonine age, of course, Latin didn't come to a screeching halt. And down to the 6th century, which is when the Romance languages start to definitively develop in a recognizable form from Latin. So down to the 6th century, from the Antonine period to the 6th century, we have a selection of slips that have been contributed to the archive. And many of those slips will look a little bit different from the earlier slips. Here you have a slip of Livy compared with a slip from the Vulgate Bible, illustrating the same word, tridestino. And the slip from the Vulgate Bible is much more succinct. It's simply, well, it's typed for one thing, and it simply gives the bold reference where you can find this particular instance. And I should emphasize that the selection of the material to excerpt from the Antonine age down to the 6th century is everything that the excerptors deemed lexicographically significant. So not every single word. If every single word of St. Augustine alone had been excerpted, the material in the archive would be 50% more. he was such a prolific author and so much of what he's written has survived. No, what they excerpted was what is lexicographically significant. So interesting usages or anomalous spellings and grammatical forms and so forth. And I should mention that now that we have all the electronic databases, people think, well, why do you need to use the Thesaurus material? The reason is that we would be overwhelmed if we used every database for every author. They did a test on the word plausus a few years ago. They did the article for plausus from the material in the archive, and then they went to the Setadoc database to collect all the instances of plausus that are present in that database right down through the 6th century. And then they worked through those instances to see whether there was anything there that they should have included in the article, and there was nothing. So the excerpters at the end of the 19th century who made the slips had done their job and captured everything that mattered about plausus for that excerpted period. Obviously, the collection of the material, the excerption, the making of the slips took a while. It took 5 years, but by 1899, they were ready to start actually writing the articles. And now I want to show you the archive with all these wonderful sound boxes stacked in an orderly manner so that one can scamper up a ladder and take one down and look at whatever word interests one. And you are welcome as a visitor. I don't recommend that you go there to look at a wrong word. It's only worth going there if you've got a really, really short word to look at, because otherwise you're basically sitting there for months writing a TLL article. And it's a very specialized task, as you will see in a moment. And adjacent to the archive, we have the library where the authors are arranged in chronological order, each with their own number. As I showed you, Virgil is number 19. And it is a library of 32,000 volumes, all devoted to Latin. It's a fantastic place to do work on any sort of Latin project, as I can attest from personal experience. So here is the contract that was signed in the bottom right-hand corner by Teubner himself, who was the publisher, agreed to be the publisher of the big Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. And I've picked out one of my fascicles from my shelf to show you what an enormous format it is. I will hide myself completely in showing you this enormous format. I have made a reduced scan of the introduction for you as one of your handouts. I did not have the capacity on our scanner to make a scan the size of the TLL itself, so you can print it out on our paper. It'll work. So just one more tribute to Wölfflin before we get on to using the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. Here is the bust of Wölfflin that stands right outside the library door in Munich, and you can pay tribute to him every day. I gather he was rather a difficult person. Many great scholars, of course, are difficult people, so we will allow that. He was the person to whom, of all people, we owe the impetus for this enormous project of signal importance for Latin scholarship. Now, a few statistics. There are about 55,000 words in the vocabulary of ancient Latin, and the slips are about 10 million. The boxes about 6,500. As many as 1,500 slips can fit into a single box. There are some words remaining that are of monstrous proportions. The word known has 37 boxes, qui, quae, quod, 64 boxes. The verb to be, 54.5 boxes, ut, 35 boxes. The library is 32,000 volumes. 375 scholars from 20 countries have contributed to this project already. The etymologies at the beginning of the word are written by Indo-European specialists, of whom there have been 12 in the career of the Thesaurus since 1894 who have contributed these etymologies. There have been 8 specialists in Romance languages who talk about the derivatives At the end of the preliminary material, as I'll show you in a minute, there's a section about any Romance derivatives. More than 100 people have done proofreading for the Thesaurus, and the words published already to date are about 44,000 words, so 70% of the entire vocabulary of Latin. They print 1,350 copies, and the publisher is the consortium of 35 academies from 27 countries on 5 continents that comprises the Kommission für den Thesaurus Linguae Latinae, so the committee. Okay, now how do we use it? Well, you can turn to your handout if you like, but the PowerPoint will track it precisely. I've given you the address and all the contact details. If you would like to visit the Thesaurus, write to the Executive Secretary, Dr. Flieger, in advance to alert him of your impending visit so that they can be prepared to welcome you, as I know they will. And please note the fantastic new website of the Thesaurus. It is an enormous resource with fascinating material, and I've given you the link here. There's a map, which I will show you again on the next screen, because the Thesaurus is part of the Bavarian Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Bayerische Akademie der Wissenschaften, and it occupies a portion of the old palace in the center of Munich. And that's why you can see the Hofgarten, the court garden, which is a beautiful space that you can see from the windows of the Thesaurus. The Thesaurus is in, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see my cursor. Marco, can you see my cursor or not?
Yes.
You can. Oh, wonderful. Well, the Thesaurus is up here on the top 2 floors of this corner of the Academy building, and that's there. Okay. And then here, oops, sorry, where that arrow is the front door, this wonderfully imposing double-leafed oak door with above it the inscription Bayerische Akademie der Wissenschaften. It's a very imposing building, and that is where you will visit if you visit the Thesaurus. Now, the coverage. I will repeat what I've said already because this is absolutely critical. The archive contains a record of every instance of every Latin word in any medium from the beginning until the 2nd century CE, so through Apuleius into the Antonine period. And then a selection of the lexicographically significant usages between the 2nd and 6th centuries CE. The articles that are written, and one thinks a dictionary has entries, every entry in this dictionary is an article, a scholarly article in its own right, and I'm going to refer to them as articles. The articles do not quote every instance from the archive. That would obviously be overkill. Think of a word like and. You don't need to cite every time someone used the word and, meaning just plain and. So all the surviving attestations are seldom included, except for very rare words. But you will always get a signal at the beginning of the article as to whether all the attestations are quoted or not. And if it's only a representative selection, which it almost always is, then you get what are known as the cigara, the 2 crossed cigars, the 2 fat cigars, the symbol in front of the lemma, the quotation for the word, which indicates to you that not everything in the archive is present in the dictionary. Now, the contents so far, we went galloping down from A all the way down to the end of M, and then N was omitted for the moment, and O and P were completed. Now, in 2 teams, the Thesaurus went back to start N again with half of them, and the other half went to R. They've left N for the moment, and they're pressing through to the end of R, and then they will have to pick up N again and Q, and then from S to the end of the alphabet. You will see that it so happens that the end of volume 1 and volume 2 both happen to be proper names. And you will also see that there is a supplement, the onomasticon, for C and D. After D, they decided not to go on with any of the proper names. They had sewn them into the first 2 volumes for A and B, and then dedicated separate volumes for C and D, but they decided not to go on with that because it was slowing them down. And there are other resources. If you're interested in a proper name, there's all the prosopographical works, encyclopedias, and so forth that are available. However, all the attestations for the proper names are there in boxes in the archive, or maybe stored in people's offices, and one can consult them if one wishes. I know what you're thinking, which is, what about a word like lunar? When does it just mean the moon? And when does it mean moon? Okay, a personification or a deity. Well, this, of course, is a hard call, and some of the articles make that very clear. There are cases where they can't be sure whether they're dealing with a proper name or not. Remember, the Thesaurus is a work of the human brain, and therefore it is fallible. And there are all sorts of calls that have to be made, and who knows whether one's always making the right decision. Although these articles go through multiple layers of checking before they are published by the author himself or herself, their editor, other members of the team, and then the proofreaders. Mistakes creep in, of course they do, but the Thesaurus has a very high level of accuracy. Now, a bit of bibliography, and I'm only going to point out to you that the Prima Nenda is one of your 2 handouts in English. Okay, I'm not expecting you to read it in Latin. The rest of the material on this bibliography I can talk about in the Q&A if you like, but it's pretty self-explanatory what the articles are about. So I'll come back to that in Q&A if you like. Modes of access. The print version is obviously available for a fee from De Gruyter, the publisher who's taken over from Teubner, but there is a free PDF on the website of the Thesaurus. Now, this is obviously not an interactive kind of searching, but nevertheless, you have the whole material there free of charge, and that is a huge development of the last few years. The online version, which is also published by De Gruyter, has a subscription attached to it, and most of us rely on an institutional subscription because it's quite expensive. But it is available by subscription. And the thing about the online version is that De Gruyter has put it up in 2 forms. One is the article form, the way you would see it in print, but the other form is they've made a list of the passages cited in the article. Now, this, of course, is very useful if you just want to know where the author of that particular article classified a particular instance in an author that you're interested in. But that, of limited value in itself, is of no use if you're wanting to understand the word itself. Then you need to read the article. And so a lot of what I say from now on is going to be how one reads an article. It's not as straightforward as you might think. So I hope I'll be able to help. Now, the way the entries are structured, first you've got the lemma telling you which word it is, and then the preliminary material. I'll show you an example just now. This covers the etymology contributed by an Indo-Europeanist, any Greek equivalents, any variants in spelling, variants in forms and gender, abbreviations used, especially in inscriptions and graffiti and that kind of thing. The ancient etymology, often differing wildly from what modern scholars believe the true etymology to be. The distribution of the word, really fascinating, seeing when it becomes visible and when it stops being visible. And then textual issues, words that are constantly confused, like rapidus and rabidus, that kind of thing. And then the Romance derivatives, if there are any. And then we get down to the definitions, which will begin with an initial periphrasis, usually IQ, idem est quod, the same as, or a Greek gloss. And one of the examples I'm going to deal with in this talk is horeum, the word for a warehouse, and apotheke is the Greek equivalent, so that is given as the definition of this word. The sub-definitions usually proceed by oppositional pairs or sometimes triplets. And this is one of the lexicographical principles that has developed in the course of the work on the Thesaurus. These subdefinitions by pairs were not an initial principle that was adopted right from the beginning, but that's the way it's done now, and makes it very easy to track the thought, the author's thought in making the article. So proprie, literally, versus in imagine, metaphorically. Vi strictiore, the stricter sense, versus vi latiore, the looser sense, generatum, speciatum, etc. Okay, so developing by oppositional pairs, and occasionally triplets. You can see de hominibus, de bestiis, de rebus, something which is applied to men or beasts or things. And I put horium there, but I think I meant something else, and I have to check that later. So let's go on. How to cite this? Once you have crossed the threshold of the Thesaurus and left awestruck by the industry, you will always want to attribute the article to a human author, not merely to the TLL as though it's a sort of word from on high that just developed out of nothing. And so I always put the attribution of the article's author. I believe that is a proper scholarly way to proceed. And so on the handout, you can refer to these different methods of citing it. Of course, you can make up your own. There's no standard way of referring to the TLL, but I would recommend mentioning the author's name. Now, usage tips. The articles are written entirely in Latin, which can be very compressed. Words in italics are glosses supplied by the author of the article for clarity. Anything that's in Roman type is an ancient quotation. What's in italics is the author speaking. We'll see this in operation in a moment. To save space, the articles are written with maximum compression, and it's therefore essential to master their signs and conventions, especially the different forms of bracket. And you can find all that set out in the prima nenda in the introduction, which is your second handout for today. Note that some modes of citation have changed over the decades. For instance, the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum used to be called Corp in the TLL and is now called CIL. Some references to relevant scholarship are included, so it is not devoid of secondary references by any means. The articles are cited by column and line number, and in the print edition, the line numbers run economically down the middle of the page. It's very cunning, so they refer to both columns. The etymologies and derivatives are supplied by the specialists, and they've signed their contributions, and so have the contributors of the articles. And I've explained how to find out whose initials you're dealing with at any given moment. Now, most interestingly and importantly, lexicographical methods have evolved since 1899. And finer distinctions are now accommodated, more ambiguity, that kind of thing. And on the bibliography, the article by Gregory Hayes is particularly interesting in this regard. He compares three virtual synonyms, three nouns from the same semantic field: artifacts, composed in 1906, faber in 1913, and opifex in 1976. And they all mean a maker, plus or minus. And Gregory shows how much these articles differ in the amount of distinction that they make in analyzing the use of these words. Artifacts pretty much just gives you an alphabetical list of the kinds of skills that an artifact can practice, whereas faber distinguishes between skills that are manual and skills that are mental, like making a poem, that kind of thing. And read Gregory's article, and you will see how much more sophisticated the article for opifex is by Herr Beikircher in 1976, which accommodates a much larger amount of subtlety in its analysis. Now, there are useful supporting documents on the Thesaurus website in the download area that I commend to you. And finally, and very important, this should really be in bold, some of the long articles include a kind of table of contents at the beginning, an outline of the article. And my recommendation, however short the article you're going to read, it's of huge value to make your own outline. And I'll show you how to do it in a second. It helps so much to track the thought through the article if you've got this little table of contents, this outline to follow. Okay, here is a zettel, another zettel, a little piece of Lucan. I want to make sure that you understand that this particular replication of this slip is used for the word Eurus, okay, the east wind, and Lucan is author number 41 in the sequence in the Thesaurus library, and this slip has 72 instances, okay? So just a little reminder of what the slips are doing. And then I wanted you also to understand the enormous value and interest of the preliminary material between the lemma, between the word and its definition. We have this preliminary material. For horeum, our word warehouse, the etymology is unknown. Hoffman himself said, we don't know, we can't trace this word. The spelling varies considerably, and the corresponding Greek transliterations are included, which is very useful for seeing the presence or absence of the aspirate. The abbreviations are given there, and also you can think of this word as neuter. It occurs in the feminine and in the masculine as well, and those instances are tracked in the preliminary material here. It's in the Notae Tironianae, which is the shorthand system in antiquity, was so-called developed by Cicero's secretary Tiro, hence the name. The meaning and the ancient etymology, they were sure it was related to hordeon, barley, that is recorded there. And then the distribution from Plautus, probably present in Cato and definitely in Cicero onwards. This word is ubiquitous in Latin. And it has two Romance derivatives that are traced at the end of the preliminary material. It's always interesting, the preliminary material. Very compact, doesn't take long to read, always fascinating. And now here is the outline that I've made for the article castrensis. And you all know the word castra, camp. So castrensis is the adjective from that noun. So camp related is what castrensis means. And it has a triple definition here, not a pair of oppositions, but a triplet of oppositions. So the first meaning when it pertains to the camp, okay, and because camps are usually out in the country, it can also mean rustic or rural. And it can be applied both to things and to people and animals. And from time to time, it's then used as a substantive, as a noun. It can also be used of the castra of the imperator, the originally general, then of course emperor, and hence it comes to mean the palace. And therefore is used of both things and jobs or offices of lower rank in the emperor's palace, particularly the freedmen of the emperor, the liberti Augusti. And thirdly, it is used of types of rank in late antiquity. And I've given you the line numbers that are relevant here, so that you can see roughly how many instances there are of each. And then I've replicated for you just the second section here, ad castra imperatoris. And I want you to see that the very first instance cited is from Suetonius. And because the Thesaurus operates chronologically in each subsection, we can be confident that there is no earlier attestation of this meaning of castrensis before Suetonius's Life of Tiberius. Even before that, of course, we've got a whole lot of things in italics, which means they were written by Herr Barnier himself, including a reference to Hirschfeld's Kaiserliche Verwaltungsbeamte, so Hirschfeld's book about the imperial administration, which deals on pages 307 to 317 with precisely people whose job is described as castrenses. And then you will see that we have a number of places where we have brackets, which give you mostly quotations from inscriptions here, which are similar to what preceded the bracket. And I'd like to draw your attention in particular to line 74, where we have aug lib procurator. It's just proc in the actual inscription, but it's been filled out here to procurator, and it's in expanded print. I hope you can see that the print is much wider for the word procurator than it is for what else is in this extract. And when you see a word printed wide like that, it means that that word occurs in all the subsequent attestations in the brackets. Because the wonderful thing is that we have volume 6 of the CIL, number 652, giving us this meaning, procurator castrensis, but then there's a whole string of comparative examples that we can look up, very economically cited here by book and by volume and line, volume and inscription number, including this Greek example, where you've got this person, Kreskens, who is a procurator castrensis, and the procurator in Greek is an epitropos, and castrensis in Greek becomes castresis. You will see there, we've got the eta without the nu. There's no nasal in the Greek spelling here. And that's really very interesting as an example of how this word is taken over into Greek. So I hope it's clear what we can get out of a little extract like this. I really don't want to spend too long on each of these because I've got a few examples to go over just at the end here, and I've already been talking for about 40 minutes. So give me another few, if you wouldn't mind. The summer school. Too late to register it for this year. The positions get snapped up the minute it's advertised, but it's always a week in June or July. And the procedure is that the attendees attend lectures and demonstrations and so on, but they also work on a word of their own choosing. And it's been a smash hit, the summer school. If you would like to do it, here is the special dedicated email address to write for information and ultimately to register. So much for our handout. Now I'm going to finish up with just a few examples of what you can do with the Thesaurus. And obviously, we could go on talking about this for days and days, but I've selected a few examples, just very limited examples, to try and show you some of the treasures that are hiding in this treasury of the Latin language. So let's look at the dispositio for the word pera, which I've translated here as backpack. Tote bag might be a slightly better word. It's anything that you can carry stuff in, basically. Okay, and Grant Parker wrote this word when he was the South African fellow at the TLL back in the 90s. And he divided it up into proprie, literally, and in imagine, metaphorically. And under literally, he had its general use, when a tote bag is a tote bag is a tote bag, and the specialized uses, which are the tote bag carried by the cynics, the tote bag carried by shepherds, who always have to take their shepherd's pie with them when they're going out to watch the sheep, and then gamma, fascinating, usus perae negatur discipulis Christi. Its use is forbidden to Christ's disciples. Luke 9, verses 3 to 5, Jesus's instructions to the disciples. Take nothing for the journey, neither stick nor pack, neither bread nor money, nor are you each to have a second coat. When you're admitted to a house, stay there and go on from there. As for those who will not receive you, when you leave their town, shake that dust off your feet as a warning to them. And you will see that Grant has noted that in these specialized uses, in the use for the cynics, we have the pera usually with the baculus, and that's precisely that stick that Jesus tells his disciples not to take with them. You need a stick, obviously, to defend yourself, but the disciples of Jesus are going to go out without defense, without any form of bodily sustenance, and throw themselves on the mercy of the people they meet. So that becomes a whole section in this article, and is the kind of nugget that you can get out of the TLL. Now, we're not going to have time to go through the whole dispositio for my current favorite word, horium, warehouse, written by Stark in the early 20th century. But you have the first major sense when it's literally a warehouse on this screen, and then we'll go on to the metaphorical sense in a second. And I wanted to point out to you, most of us, when we're first learning Latin, learn this word as granary. In fact, the Thesaurus article makes it very clear that all kinds of things can be stored in here, not just grain. And when you get down to 1A, 1A, 1B, beta, okay, there's my subdivision, you find that actually it's the same thing as a modern basement or a garage or a storage unit outside a major city. It's where things are stored that have been neglected or need to be kept or protected. This is the Latin that they would have used for a storage unit. And that's something rather different from how you might imagine a granary if you're going to buy a one-word definition or equivalent of this word. And then the other thing I wanted to show you here was in the metaphorical use of the word, okay, in comparison, simile, metaphor, etc. Under the specialized uses, you can use it of the storehouse of the mind, of memory. That's a horeum. What you have inside your mind, between your ears, that whole memory of everything that you can recall, that's your horeum. That's where you store the things that matter, the precious memories. And it's wonderful that Latin used that very, very ordinary word, which everybody met on the pediment of the local granary or wine storage shop. They use that word for the storehouse of the mind. Now, sometimes the Thesaurus will give you table, a useful table, and I've picked this one out from an article by Ilse Reinecker for the adverb paulatim, meaning gradually. And as I'm sure you're aware, there are at least 3 other words that mean gradually in Latin: sensim, gradatim, and peditemptim. And so Frau Reinecker made this fascinating table, which shows you the authorial preferences, those authors who describe anything happening gradually, for the use of these different words. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that Cicero almost never uses paulatim, but he really likes sensim. Okay, look at Ovid, paulatim all the time, almost, sensim a few times, never uses gradatim or peditemptim. When you get down to Augustine, 112 instances, I need to put in another, another tab there, 112 instances of paulatim. That sweeps the board. The next most frequent word with him is gradatim, with 40 uses, as opposed to the 112 for paulatim. So this is a very useful kind of material that you can find in the TLL. And then another very specialized little question that you might have in your mind: how often in poetry is et and postponed to third position? Well, the article for et is in 47 columns in the TLL. It was done by the great J.B. Hoffman himself, whose portrait in the Thesaurus is simply labeled Verfasser des Artikels et, the author of the article and. That's what he's known for. And I see I've misspelled his name, which is just horrific. I will correct this. 1 F, 2 N's. And indeed, in that long article, there's 47 columns, he devotes approximately 8 lines to the fact that you can find et in poetry postponed to third position, normally in the second half of the pentameter in an elegiac couplet. And interestingly, all the examples he cites, about a dozen of them, are from the Augustan poets or Tiberian, Manilius, the Tiberian poet, with only 2 exceptions. There's one instance in Valerius Flaccus, that's not a pentameter, obviously, and one instance in Juvenal, also not a pentameter. Otherwise, all the instances that he finds to quote are from the Augustan poets. So that's a kind of nugget that you can find there. And now my last example is going to take you to Pompeii, to the Beiträge. The Beiträge are contributions to Latin scholarship that develop from the work of the Thesaurus, but are not the sort of thing that you could put into a Thesaurus article. And these are published periodically in the Museum Helveticum. It used to be that they were published in Philologus, and then it moved over to Museum Helveticum. And I am going to take you to Pompeii, to Regio 9, right in the middle, to Insula 2 on the Via Stabiana, and to house number 26, doorway number 26, the house of Marcus Caecilius Marcellus. Because it's covered in graffiti, or at least it was, most of them have disappeared now. And Paolo Gatti, who was the Italian fellow at the TLL in the 1980s and early 1990s, contributed some musings on one single graffito, a graffito on the south side of the second pillar from the right in the portico facing the garden in the house of Marcus Caecilius Marcellus, which says simply, Onumuium. Unfortunately, it's not replicated in photographic reproduction in the TLL, so I can't show you what the writing looks like. But it was very early on by August Mau himself corrected to Onumulum, so that not IUM at the end, but LVM. And as such, it is duly recorded in the TLL under the letter O, Onumulum, in square brackets. And the square brackets mean this word does not exist. This is just a phantom word. And Frau Bayer is the one who contributed the discussion there with due reference to Mau's correction of the I to the L. Okay, so everybody thought, oh, well, this is not a word, okay? If it were a word, it would probably be a diminutive from numus, a coin, okay? So numulus, little coin, diminutive form. And so how are we to imagine this turning up on a wall? Did someone look in their purse and say, oh, little coin? Or, you know, how exactly would this have worked? The Thesaurus didn't believe it was a word. Oh, and numulum is accused of exclamation? Probably not. Well, Herr Gatti thought about this, and he thought to himself, the word onos in Greek, meaning donkey, transliterated second declension in Latin onus, is the same as the Latin mullus for donkey. And just as in many modern languages, donkey can be used as how can I put this politely, a term of criticism or general scorn. You donkey, as indeed it is in Latin texts. Asinus is often used as a Schimpfwort, would be the German word. I'm thinking of that work by Ilona Opel, Schimpfwörter, Lateinische Schimpfwörter, Latin words of abuse, terms of abuse. And so Herr Gatti realized that what we have here is onum mullum, accused of exclamation probably, you donkey, okay, you donkey, you ass, written on a wall of the house of Marcus Caecilius Marcellus. So that is the kind of thing that you can learn from referring to the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. And all I can say in valediction is have fun with it. You can learn so much from it. And I will help. My email address should be available to you somewhere. I think I put it on the handout. If you need any assistance, I'll try. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much, Kathy. This was truly an amazing lecture. We're so glad to have you here with us, and I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. So let's open the floor and see if anybody in the audience has any thoughts, questions on any aspect of what we've been talking about. I believe Zoom allows you to sort of virtually raise your hand, so you have that option. If you wish to do that, I will do my best to, spot your raised hand right away. And if not, you can just jump in. I will break the ice. Can I ask you, Kathy, what would you recommend if you were talking to a young scholar just starting out in the classics who wanted to, sort of incorporate the thesaurus in their research, in their studies, in their work? What would you say is the best approach? What would you say is the best way to use it?
Okay, good. Well, thank you for asking that question, Marco. I would say read the introduction and make a note in your calendar to reread it 3 months from now, and then 3 months after that, and 3 months after that. You really need to absorb the technical details of this work in order to be able to use it profitably. And then I would say, alongside that, think of a word that interests you and try and think of a small word. Okay, so a word that doesn't have thousands of attestations. Some word, it could be quite a simple word, one of the words for a donut or something like that in Latin, and then look it up in the TLL and try and work through the article using the handout that I gave you, and tracing what's the lemma, what is the preliminary material, where does the definition start, and then thinking about how do these brackets work, how can I track my way through this, and make the dispositio for it, make that plan, that table of contents. That's absolutely critical. I cannot emphasize to you how helpful it is to make that plan. And on the computer, of course, one can make it by using the tab like I did in the examples I showed you, so that you can see the gradations of sub-meaning, 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 sub-meaning.
Thank you, Kathy. I think we have a question from Katerina Banks.
Yes, hello. I have a question. Where could we, thank you so much for this talk, and I'm really excited to start looking at this tool. I first heard of it when I was in high school I was in my junior, senior of high school going around talking to different classics departments, and I met this one classicist at Johns Hopkins, and he was a scholiast. He specialized in the scholia or marginalia, and I'm curious, are there people still there who focus on the scholia, and how do those occur in the published version? And then also, where would we get access to a Latin version of the Praemonenda at the beginning? Because I would like to read it in Latin too.
Okay, good. Well, let me deal with that question first. The Praemonenda are in the published printed copy, and they're also in, I believe, the online version that's published by De Gruyter, but they're not on the Thesaurus website. And that's why I gave you the English version. But I mean, I have it here, actually. Yeah, it's the very thing. And I could certainly scan the Latin one to send you, if you can put your email address in the chat, or send it to Marco or something. It used to be just in Latin, and then it was translated into the major European languages, and I believe it also exists in Japanese, although I don't see it in Japanese here, but it's in Russian, and then Spanish, French, etc. Yeah, now then you wanted to know about the scholia. If it's ancient, then it's in the Thesaurus. And people don't specialize as such because they have to deal with the whole word. And so, some people may have a special interest in legal Latin or something like that. And so when the words are parceled out, they might be given a word that has a lot of attestations in legal texts. But basically, the wonderful thing about working there, I imagine, I've never worked on the dictionary myself, is that you have to be able to deal with every kind of genre and every usage of a word. And that way, people become well-versed in scholia, in legalese, in Christian usages and all the rest of it. And there are so many Christian authors that most of us have absolutely never heard of. And that's an opportunity for me to sing the praises of the index, okay, thus, which is now being updated online and gives you the anointed edition of each author that the Thesaurus has used, and tells you what century some of these people come from. I mean, really, I know nothing about all these bishops who wrote prolifically in the early Christian period. And I find the index of such use that I've got one volume here at home and another copy of it in my office, because I use it the whole time.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Do we have any other questions, any more thoughts? Well, there's a comment in the chat by Diane Anderson. She says, I think many people would like to have the Latin version on the website too. Well, I agree with that. I'm certainly one of them. Let's see, any more questions, any comments?
I see a few yellow hands up here.
Okay, Gaius, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Coleman, and especially my ears perked up in the last 2 minutes of your talk. So I'm sorry my question is going to be so specific, but I'm reading about Scipio Asina, who was consul in First Punic War and has a derisive agnomen Asina. And looking at your Latin index, which I didn't get a chance to, while you were reading, I didn't get to read far enough down. Isn't this unusual? Well, is his agnomen strangely masculine, although it's Asina, or is there some meaning I don't understand? Instead of being Asinas, he is called Scipio Asina because he was captured alive treacherously during a truce when, I guess he had his guard down, but the Carthaginians shouldn't have violated the truce. And eventually he's released, and in fact, he's even elected consul a second time, even though they're calling him Asina. So could you at all guess or tell me more about what's going on? They're not calling him Scipio Asinas, so I don't understand. Could you elaborate at all, please?
I can simply elaborate by telling you that luckily, volume A of the TLL includes all the proper names, so you will find the answer there.
Great, okay. I'll be able to look it up and hopefully we'll learn this mystery better.
And if you can't get access to a copy, just write to me and I'll look it up in my own copy here.
Great, thank you.
So.
Great, so I'm not sure who was first, but let's hear Solveig and then Jason.
For the lecture. I wanted to ask about the summer school and when places start being advertised for next year.
I'm not actually sure. I think the thing to do is to write to that address. I think it's somewhere in the early spring. I don't think it's already in the autumn. I think it's in the early spring that they advertise the next summer school. But I'm sure that email address is monitored all the time. So just drop them a line, and if they know the dates already, they can let you know.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason's next.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It was a wonderful lecture. My question is, is the future of the TLL secure? I mean, my understanding is that it's funded by the German government, and maybe it would occur to governments more as a good idea to fund a gigantic Latin dictionary in the 19th century than today. So are they worried that maybe they'll decide to, I mean, it's quite an enterprise, I know, because I have a friend who works there as a full-time employee. It's not a small task to pay and operate this. And are they going to keep doing it and let them get all the way through known and all the way to the letter, I don't know, Z or whatever it is?
Well, you're quite right, of course, that it is funded. The major funding comes from the German government, and then all the contributing academies contribute a small amount of money themselves, and small in relation to the cost of the entire thing. And it is certainly the case that these very long-term projects are no longer at the sort of top of the priority list of scholarly funding bodies. And so this is an opportunity for me to say that the Thesaurus depends upon having a number of persons, as many people as possible, who are qualified to do the work. And that's where I feel so proud of the Society for Classical Studies, which is our own learned society in the United States. We've been sending an annual fellow there since the 1980s. And regular as clockwork, our fellow turns up and does the work, gets trained to do the work and performs it for at least 1 year. Occasionally there's a renewal. And so if anybody on this Zoom call would like to fund a fellow, a regular fellow, to go annually to the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae as a second American fellow or international fellow, would they please get in touch with me right away? Because the funding obviously is a concern. With a huge project like that, it's always going to be a concern. We do want to finish it, we really do. This is a tool for the ages. It'll never be done again, let's put it that way. It'll never be done again. And so it needs to be done right, and it needs to be finished. And it is very much our hope that we will be able to fund it to completion.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Leo, I think, is next.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thanks so much, Professor Coleman, for the talk. I really learned a lot. I was curious, now that we've seen sort of the finished product of an article, thinking about from the perspective of the author, having to go through so much material and organize it, you know, by figurative and literal and all chronological, all these different ways. What's sort of the thought process of when someone sits down and starts to work on a word and to work through all of that? Thank you.
Yes, well, this is getting right to the nub of the issue. Somebody will be allocated a word and they will collect the box or boxes from the archive, put them on their desk and start to read all the way through those slips, getting a sense of the chronological spread of the word. And then they will start to see the major subdivisions. Okay, so literally, metaphorically, things like that. And then as they read, as they go into the library, consult the broader context in some of these authors, look at any material that has been written about the word. I should explain actually that there are these Ergänzungsschachtel, there are these extra boxes in the archive where people have filed any scholarship that deals with that word. So any commentator writing about Ovid or something who said something interesting about a particular word, that will be registered there. If anybody has written an article in Blotter or in the, I don't know, Classical Quarterly or something about a particular word, that's all logged there. That's available for the author of the article to consult. And then they start to feel their way to a disposition. And one thing I haven't really emphasized is that sometimes grammatical issues will also be part of the table of contents. If a word which is normally used with the ablative is sometimes anomalously used with the accusative or something, that will also be part of the map, the plan of the article. And then every author works with one of the editors. There's a team of about 5 editors to whom the authors are assigned, and they will consult the editor, suggest a preliminary dispositio, have feedback on that. You have to be humble to work there because often the editor may have radically different ideas, born of long experience. And then gradually, as they work together, it starts to take shape. And particularly ambiguous or anomalous instances where it's not clear what the ancient author means, those will be discussed to and fro. The wonderful thing about being there, I've been there doing my own work and go off to have lunch with the Mitarbeiter, and they discuss their words with each other. So it's really a corporate endeavor. And then it's possible to consult a specialist in some other institution if you've got some architectural word and you're really not sure which part of a building it relates to or whatever. And then ultimately you've got the proofreaders who may slash and burn and write words in the margin like nonsense if they think it's nonsense. So ultimately it's been through a very fine sieve, let's put it that way. And on the website, trying to remember exactly where it is on the website, there is a very short description by Roberta Stewart at Dartmouth, who was a Mitarbeiter. She was a Stipendiatin. She was the fellow that we sent in the States in the late 1980s. And she's written a short description of how the work proceeds. And so if you go on the website, it should be possible to find that.
Great. We probably have time for just a couple more questions. So Gaius, I think you've had your hand up for a while. Okay, it just remained up from earlier. I don't believe I know your name. It just says Zoom user. Can you introduce yourself?
I see Paul Perot and I see John Van Sickle. I can't see Zoom user though.
Oh, that's what they call me, a Zoom user. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a question I've always wondered about. When you do a project like this with a living language, such as Latin was for many, many centuries, I believe it still is there a big problem with spelling in terms of the word being written various ways? Yeah. And is there, is there a way around that, or you just try to guess, do your best as far as what this word is actually, as you pointed out earlier with the the ass word, the asinus, well, I'm assuming asinine comes from. Yes. How big of a problem is that with a living language that was living at that time?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there was no sort of Légion d'honneur or something which was stipulating how people had to spell things. So the spelling varies considerably in antiquity. And that's part of the preliminary material of each word, that they track the variant spellings and they will list the word under its most common spelling. But the variation in the spelling is a huge clue, obviously, to pronunciation also. And that is very faithfully and meticulously recorded in the TLL. You can see it there in the sort of detail that I've not seen anywhere else for a Latin spelling and pronunciation.
Thank you.
Sikelidas.
Oh, I guess I am, yes. To thank you, Kathy, to begin with, for the acrobatia and the energy and the wonderful discipline. And it's such a privilege to come back and hear you again. And in this description of the literal and then the metaphor and metonymy, I wonder to what extent this awareness, this critical differentiation and association of these cognitive processes of metonym and metamor, as opposed to the elusive literal, what kind of discussions will take place in that wonderful lunchroom which you were describing?
Yeah. Well, this is, of course, a fascinating issue. And the modern TLL is not immune to the influences in the larger academy. And so under the influence of structuralism and other isms and theories in the last 30, 40, 50 years, the Thesaurus has become less positivist and less definitive and more able to accommodate ambiguity, more able to say, we're not sure whether this is a metaphorical use or a literal use, for example. And then another very interesting detail is that because they adopt this chronological approach, it might so happen, it might just so happen, and has been pointed out in reviews, that the earliest attested use might be metaphorical. It just might happen to be metaphorical. which doesn't mean to say that it was sort of adopted by hearsay before they encountered the actual object, but it means that our material has as its earliest instance of metaphorical use, and that will be tracked in the TLL.
That's interesting. Thank you. That's very interesting.
Okay, we have Paul Perrault and then Chikandi.
Good afternoon. I
Hi.
enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. My question is simply about the safety of the building structure for housing the library.
Mhm.
Is it fireproof? And have provisions been made to protect this huge investment?
Mhm. Well, this is a question that was obviously of prime urgency twice in the 20th century in the two world wars, when it was actually not yet in the Academy building. It was in Maximilianeum, which is up the street. And the entire archive was translocated to a monastery in Bavaria during the Second World War, precisely because they were so afraid that the building would be bombed, and indeed it was. And if you walk along, let me see which street it would be. If it would be if you walk along the side of the building opposite the Tertina Kirche, you will see that the stones of the building are just painted onto the wall. It was repaired just with plaster. All the stonework was actually destroyed in the Second World War. So today there are, I believe, provisions to guarantee the safety of the building insofar as that is possible. The library is obviously very vulnerable. The archive itself of slips has a complete microfilm copy in Princeton. So the slips have been copied. The slips are not going to disappear. And then, of course, we have to hope that the building will remain safe.
Yeah, for fire provisions, there's actually canisters of gases that can be unleashed if there's a fire to protect whatever's in it. There's a small private school here in the Washington area that has that provision for the rare books library.
Well, I'll make a note of this. I don't know the answer to the question, what the fireproofing provisions are. I mean, the Bavarian Academy itself must have some sort of fireproofing, but it is an issue to bring up, and I certainly will bring it up. So thank you for raising it.
Yeah, there are many museums that don't have adequate protection for these things, including poor electric.
Yeah, or look at Notre Dame. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It's a great concern to raise. Chikandi, do you have a question?
Hi, Chikandi.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi.
Mr. Coleman for your lecture. Yes. My question regards the summer school.
Oh yes.
Yes. I wanted to ask who is allowed to attend, first of all, and secondly, when they do attend, you said they have an opportunity to work on a word of their choice. Is this a word they can just choose? Does it have to be a word that does not yet appear in the thesaurus? And if it happens, I don't know how long they work on this. I think you mentioned a week or something. But if they produce a work that is of interest, what happens to their work? Is it a beginning of some work that will later get published or whatnot? I just had this question.
Chikandi, you need to write to that email address to find out the answers to these very specific questions. I do believe that they work on words that have not yet been covered in the published work, and I cannot say for sure whether anybody's preliminary work on a word has ultimately resulted in it being incorporated into the queue of publishable material. But I cannot imagine that they would let go to waste any good scholarship that is produced on a word that needs to be covered. By the same token, it takes a very long time to write one of these articles, even quite a short one. And so I'm not sure whether the work that they do on the word is anything like comprehensive, or whether they are doing something very particular with that word. So I would recommend writing to that email address. And in the meantime, of course, I'll try and find out a bit more about it, and I might be able to write up a paragraph or something for Marco to send to all the participants on this Zoom call. But thank you for asking those questions. Oh, and who can come? Anybody who's interested. And the first time they ran it, there was a very, very keen undergraduate from London who they accepted to join in. It doesn't have to be graduate students or teachers or anything like that. It's people who have the interest. And I think they're heavily oversubscribed. So maybe you have to write a paragraph explaining why you're interested. I'm not sure. And I will try and find out.
Great. Do we have one last question? Anyone? Now's your time. Yes, please.
Yes, I have one question which is not related to your work, but has always interested me. And that is, oh, you can hear me, right?
Yes. Clearly.
Okay. And that is the work that I've read about, and I'm not sure, but it's the work of Pope Benedict XVI, where he is a lover of Latin, speaks Latin, encourages the Latin Mass, etc. And I believe he came up with a dictionary of using modern words. It's like he said automobile, etc., where people today could actually converse in Latin. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I guess he combines a lot of Latin words and puts them together, that type of thing. And I just wondered what your thoughts are of using, of expanding the Latin language into modernity.
Well, I think it's a flourishing activity. There's a radio station in Finland which produces the news in Latin every day. I believe it's still broadcasting. And living Latin, spoken Latin is something, of course, Paideia itself supports and is used in many classrooms. And if people want to talk about, their daily activities, they're going to have to use words that the Romans didn't know, or didn't have, because the Romans didn't have automobiles and airplanes and all the rest of it. So yes, I mean, it is a Nachleben, it's an afterlife of a language that the Thesaurus only tracks in its actual life, in its ancient life. That's what you get out of the Thesaurus. And it's the closest we can come, I think, to understanding Roman thought, is to look so carefully at their words and how they put them together. We have nothing else to rely on. We can't speak to them, but we can speak to one another using Latin as a means of communication, which binds us together as lovers of, and I hope also people who are interested in the ancient language also. So I would certainly support that.
Wow, and I just want to say that it is so wonderful to see a person who is excited as you are about the Latin language. I think you're an inspiration to everyone else who has heard you today. I just want to thank you for that.
It's my huge good fortune. I think of Mrs. Tothill when I was learning Latin in Form 1, I was terrified of her. And that's probably a good thing because I really did my homework. And Latin has given me perennial interest. It's taken me all over the world. It's brought me into conversation with people like you. And I'm just grateful for it.
Well, thank you.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Kathy Coleman for a fantastic lecture. So let's applaud Kathy virtually. I would also like to thank our excellent team at Paideia, our wonderful staff members who have contributed to making this lecture series possible, particularly Derek McGill and Claire Cunningham. Both of whom I think are present here in the call, or at least they were until a moment ago. And let me just take the opportunity to remind everybody that this talk, along with every other talk in the lecture series, will be available on the Paideia Institute YouTube channel very soon. So thank you a lot. Thanks, Kathy. Again, it's great to have you, and take care. Till next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.